You're listening to Dear Gen Z, real stories, raw advice, and timeless lessons from the generations before us. Each week, we sit down with someone who's lived a little longer to bring you insights on life, love, purpose, and everything in between. Because sometimes the best advice doesn't come from social media, it comes from those who've been there.
Hey guys, welcome back to Dear Gen Z. I'm your host, Sean Modi, and today we're diving into something every single one of us has struggled with at some point, studying. Whether it's cramming the night before an exam, zoning out halfway through a textbook, or feeling like you're putting in hours but nothing's sticking. We've all been there. So how do you actually study smarter instead of harder? How do you make the most out of your time and get real results without burning out? To answer that, I'm joined by my former tutor, Anika Hakim, who spent years helping students not just get better grades, but learn more efficiently and effectively. Anika, thanks so much for joining us today.
Of course. I'm glad to be here. How can I help?
Well, there's a lot to cover in the episode today, so I want to jump straight into it by getting your opinion on what is the most common thing for students to mess up when studying.
Um, I think the most common thing has to be underestimating how to study, right?
Right.
Knowing how to study really comes from a very in-depth understanding of how your brain works, right? Most of us don't know how we learn best, right?
Right.
Some people learn visually, some people learn by writing notes, some people learn audibly, where people are discussing things, right? So I think the biggest mistake that students make when studying is they're trying to study the way that they see others study, right? Which is cram, 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 read,
Right.
read, read. Try to shove information down your head and memorize it, right? That works for a very small niche of students, students that have photographic memory, maybe, or students that retain information very well. But for example, we've worked together. Did that work for you?
No,
No.
not at all.
So I think the biggest study mistake is not knowing what your learning style is and not adjusting your study skills to your learning method. For
Right.
example, you're a very discussion based learner, right? So how did we approach our A push, our SAT, our ACT, all of that? We discussed, right? We had a lot of conversations, we had a lot of explaining, and that is what really helped you learn and move forward.
Right.
Granted, not all students have the opportunity or resources to learn their study style immediately, but even from being in school, you can kind of figure out what speaks to you a little bit easily and more readily than other things and kind of go from there. So that
Awesome.
would probably be the biggest thing.
Yeah. So the way I want to structure the core segment of today's episode is I want to hit on three main buckets. And in each of those buckets, if you could just explain your or what you see most people go wrong with, and
Mm,
then maybe a couple of tips or tricks. And then I'll give a story, maybe you can give a story, and then we'll summarize each bucket. So I want to start with the first one, probably the most important one that most people mess up is time management. People are always either cramming, studying way too far in advance, not studying enough, maybe studying too much. So how do you go about that?
Time management is mostly going to be modeled by how everything else in your life goes,
Right.
right? How we manage our time and our abilities in one part of our life is how we apply it across the board generally. You will make time for things that are important to you and that you prioritize. For example, if you're in sports, if you're an athlete, it is inevitable that you have to prioritize your practice times, right? And
Right.
that's what students do. When you're a dedicated athlete, you dedicate your time to prioritizing and getting prepared for sports. It's the same thing with studies. Now, the issue is that most of us don't want to study, right? So it's very, very easy in our time management to conveniently leave that out or to put it to the back burner, right?
Right.
I think time management for studying will always win the most if you're doing a little bit each day instead of cramming at the end, okay?
Mhm.
Especially as you go into college, as you go into undergrad, your study habits from high school, especially if you're a sharp student who automatically picks up on things, won't apply the same way in college anymore. Undergrad and college level courses like AP courses require you to create an understanding of a large volume of information in a not very limited amount of time, but in a strenuous amount of time, rather.
Right.
What that means is maybe in college you're not in class for 8 hours a day, right? But of those five classes, those 15 to 18 credits you have, you're going to have an exam every 3 to 4 weeks, and they're all going to happen at the same time in all of your classes. So now, if you haven't been time managementing, if you haven't put aside your time for the first 3 to 4 weeks of school. What's going to happen when those exams all start up?
It's gonna all pile up, and you're gonna have to cram.
And then it won't work and everything will kind of fall to the wayside. You know why? Because college exams, maybe in the beginning, are a little easy, but as you get into higher level college courses, they're not asking you what is A, B, and C. They're
Right.
asking you for critical thinking. And critical thinking comes from learning things progressively. So the best advice I can give for time management is set up a schedule, right? Set up a schedule, but be committed to that schedule. It doesn't need to be 7 hours of cramming before an exam. It needs to be 20 minutes a day for 3 to 4 weeks before the exam. And then you compile. The biggest thing you can do for yourself in college study or in AP study is compounding your learning. That means day one, you go over day one materials. Day two, you go over day one and two. Day three, you compound again. In this way, you ensure that you're learning everything at a foundational level and you don't forget. Because what happens when you get to an exam and you've crammed?
You just blank. That happened to me so many times. Before I started working with you, I would go into an exam. Like I remember honors chem. I think we started working. I started working with you like at the end of honors chem,
Yeah.
and the first semester was absolute hell for me. Like I would be like, yeah, I'm gonna study tomorrow, and then I was like, oh, I'll study next week. Like exams in like a week. Get to the day
Exactly.
before the exam, I'm like, oh shit, I haven't done anything. So then I would get into the chem test and drop a 50.
And
So
it's so easy to be there, right?
right.
Because just mentally we reprioritize what matters to us and we think, oh, I'll get to it, right?
Yeah.
That is the trap that all students and adults fall into. It doesn't even matter what age range you're in, okay?
Right.
The biggest skill you can give yourself is compounded studying. And this helps you to not have an overwhelming amount of bulk, right? While at the same time, building on that material and now you actually know it instead of going
Right.
into an exam and being like, crap, I remember learning this, I remember reading that word, but I don't know what it means.
Right. And is there like a certain amount of time ahead, like a certain amount of like days or weeks ahead that you recommend starting studying for an exam?
It definitely depends on the topic. For
Mm.
example, I took organic chemistry in college, right? Yeah, exactly.
Ugh.
And I don't think in any other class during undergrad, at least, that I put in that much amount of effort to a class. For
Mhm.
organic chemistry, not only did I go to outside study sessions and study groups, I would study it every single day and I would do practice problems every single day. But that's because that class required that level of work for me.
Right.
Not every class does, right? So if you can create a list of priority where these classes require the most work, these classes require a medium amount of work, this class requires little to no work, I just need to put a discussion post on once a week, right?
Right.
In that way, you won't feel overwhelmed because now you know exactly what is required of each class and you've staggered your time, put more time to those two more important classes, and then cram for the other easy ones, right? If you have to make a decision, that's the best way to do it.
Right. And that kind of feeds into the next bucket I want to hit on, which is environment and energy, right? Because if you're cramming, and not really like planning out how you want to manage your time when studying, you're going to burn out. And
Quite literally.
that's probably one of like under time management, probably one of the biggest things that students struggle with is like you sit down for 30 minutes, an hour, you're studying and you just don't want to do it anymore. Like you can't, your
No, you
brain just
don't.
turns
You
off.
really, really don't want to do it anymore.
Right. So how do you go about the energy and environment? Like, for example, when I mean environment, like busy, quiet, like around people, individual, or does it really depend on the kind of person you are? Like varies person to
Depends
person.
absolutely on the kind of person you are, right? Like I was someone that was always able to study really, really well in let's say busy environments,
Right.
like a busy coffee shop or
Mhm.
where people are milling about, because I could get locked into the zone and really intake the information I was doing. Not every student is like that. Some students need absolute quiet. Some students need someone else there that is also working to help keep them streamlined. The biggest distraction today, Sean, is not an environment, it's our phones.
Right.
That is the number one detriment
Yeah.
because our brains are wired to that dopamine hit from text messages, from phone calls, from Snapchat messages. The best way to secure an environment to study is deep study. Okay. Have you ever heard of the Pomodoro method?
I've heard about it, but I don't know what it is. Like I think you actually mentioned it once, and I
The
just never
Pomodoro
understood.
technique breaks down study into 25-minute intervals with short breaks, right?
Right.
Or you can have a variation like 45 minutes of study, 15 minutes of break. Okay.
Mhm.
What this allows is it lets you go into deep study mode and you know mentally that you have a breakup coming.
Right.
Okay? If you can train yourself, which everything is just neural training, right? If you can train yourself to put your phone away and just give yourself those 25 minutes of deep work, I'm going to spend 25 minutes just doing this worksheet front to back. And then I'm going to take a phone break.
Right.
And then I'm going to go for a walk. And then I'm going to go get some water, right? Now, what you've done is you've created consistency with breaks. Okay.
Right.
And this will allow you to get so much more out of the work you're doing and actually retain it, as opposed to when we're on our phones, texting someone and trying to learn at the same time.
Right.
Nobody's saying you don't get to do it. It's just how you do it. And this all comes down to self-discipline, right?
Right.
Everything in studying, everything in learning, everything in creating structured balance comes from understanding how to stick to discipline.
Right. And that method would also limit burnout because I remember at least when I was studying for it was I didn't study with you for the AP economics exams.
Yeah.
And the way we structured it, it was microeconomics first semester and then macro second.
Mm-hmm.
And I was studying micro because that was the first test. And I went, I'd say 3 days before the exams when I first started.
Mm-hmm.
And I had soccer practice from 8 to 9:30, came home, and then 10 to 2, I
Mm-hmm.
tried studying. And I found myself like every 5 minutes just on my phone, just like scrolling Instagram. And I was like, oh, I gotta get back to it. And like 5 minutes, I'm like, I can't do it. So I went down and get a snack. So that
Yeah.
technique would definitely
And
help with that too.
for your generation, it's that much harder for
Right.
you and everyone younger than you because you can't exist outside of a phone, right?
Right.
You can't exist outside of all of these distractions. So all you can do is control how much it gets into your schedule.
Right.
If you can set aside, prioritize time for just this and then this, that's the only way to manage it because there will never realistically be a time where you're not going to be connected to it,
Right.
right? So if in that studying for economics, you had simply started a few weeks prior and then sat down maybe once or twice a week,
Yeah.
that would have proven a much different result than later. Think about our A push prep. Did you do a lot of A push prep outside of AP class?
Not really. No.
No, because we were covering it in our sessions and you were covering it in school. So you
Right.
didn't have to sit down and cram for an AP US history exam. And what did you end up with?
I don't even remember what I got on that test. I'm not gonna
You
lie.
got a four.
Okay. Take it.
You could have gotten a five, but you got a
Oh,
four,
yeah.
right?
That wasn't
So,
my history's not my strong suit.
and that's the thing. You took a subject that wasn't your strong suit, but you studied for it appropriately.
Right.
Okay. How hard do you think it is to get a 4 out of 5 on an AP exam on a subject that you're weaker at? It all
Right.
comes
It's a
down
lot
to
harder.
studying.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Awesome. Well, I want to get into our last bucket here. Probably the most sauce we're going to get out of this. These are your learning techniques. Now, you already gave the Pomodoro technique. Do you have any more techniques that you recommend
Oh
for
my
the viewers to
gosh.
use?
So many, right? If you are a visual learner, right?
Hmm.
One of the best methods that I can recommend is a whiteboard, like not a small one, a giant whiteboard, right?
Hmm.
I like the libraries have them, your school campus will have them, and just taking everything you've learned and creating visual notes on a whiteboard, right? That repetition of writing it, of seeing it physically in front of you,
Hmm.
creates an imprint on your memory. And that's how you memorize things. That's how you learn things, right?
Right.
And if you can create flow maps of things, if you can create concept maps, like here's an idea in biology, here's all of the factors that contribute to it, here's how photosynthesis and cellular respiration works, and here's my map creating a flow diagram so that I physically understand how
Right.
it works, right? It's deepening your level of understanding, okay?
Right.
Some students are going to be more kinesthetic learners. That means touch, right? Working with 3D models, working with actual molecules and chemicals to understand the by process through which things occur, right? When I was in physical therapy school for graduate school, we had cadavers that we would actually slice into in order to understand muscle attachments.
Oh, well. It's
You know,
cool. Yeah.
that is something that becomes so seared into your brain, you never forget it, right? So that's kinesthetic learning when you're physically hands into it, right? Let's say we're talking about something a lot more abstract like history or language arts or literature. This is better with discussion.
Hmm.
Sit down with a classmate or a small group of people from the same course and talk, have discussion questions, right?
Right.
Share points, write these things down, record the session, and watch it again later, right? Right now, we have more tools and resources than ever before and the lowest amount of retention. Why?
Right.
Because we don't know how to use our tools. It's the same thing that I mentioned earlier. You can be smart as hell, but if you don't know how you learn and how to approach your own learning method, then it won't help you, right?
Right.
The last thing that I think I would absolutely harp on is you gotta make learning less miserable. Okay?
Right.
That's the best study technique. Make learning enjoyable because you get to intake information that you fake interest in it. All right? If it's boring, pretend like it's not. Didn't I tell you that all the time for like
You tell
reading
me that all the time in
all the time?
SAT prep all the time.
Because the truth is, you get to determine your attitude about it, right?
Right.
If your attitude towards learning something new is, oh my God, I don't want to do this crap, then you're never going to actually open up your brain enough to get the benefit from it, right? But if you approach any subject with this idea of, I'm going to make this seem interesting to me so that I can get through this, right? That's going to improve your outlook a ton, all right?
Right.
I was miserable in my organic chemistry classes or in my physics classes. My God, I hated
Oh,
physics.
physics sucked.
Physics is terrible,
It was
right?
awful.
It's a combination of math and science. Who
It
wants
was
that?
so bad.
But I chose to be like, all right, what are things that actually matter to me, right? And if it comes to physics, like I'm super interested in how cars work. I'm super
Mhm.
interested in how velocity works and how
Right.
we can gain speed and acceleration, all those things, right? Now I can reframe my paradigm and I can look through physics through the lens of someone that's actually interested in it, right? Even
Right.
if it's one small facet. That alone can be enough to motivate you to at least get through the class. Also,
Right.
nobody wants to fail. Everybody wants A. You want the A.
Yeah.
Make it interesting.
So I want to touch back on you mentioned the different kinds of learners. And I didn't know I was a discussion based learner until I actually started working with you. And then we would start talking, like we literally would nonstop talk for however long our sessions were, like 45, 50
Yep.
minutes.
Yep.
And I would
Sometimes on
take,
irrelevant things.
yeah, well, okay, but that was needed. But like I didn't know I was a discussion based learner until I actually did it. So how do you think someone should go about finding how they learn best, whether it's discussion, visual, kinesthetic, whatever?
Find your interests, right? When you know what your interests are, for example, how did you learn about your interest in sports? You played it,
Right.
right? How do people realize that they really like drawing or art? They start it, right?
Hmm.
You have to begin with where your interests and passions are
Right.
and then use that as a blueprint, right?
Hmm.
For example, I realized very quickly that I liked reading things and researching things. And research comes to me very, very naturally because I
Right.
like to learn about the background of things. I love to go down a rabbit hole. I
Hmm.
applied that to my academic learning so that I could figure out, okay, well, I'm clearly a research based person. If a concept doesn't make sense to me, how can I research it so that it does? You
Right.
know? So taking that understanding of like, how do I approach the things I'm already interested in? And how can I learn my learning style from that?
Right.
Most students, most kids learn from observation, but you have to make that observation process dynamic.
Right.
Being only the observer is boring. Being an active participant observer, where you're learning and doing and taking place, is how you learn. Oh, this is how I learn things. I learn by participating. I learn by watching others do it. I learn by talking about it.
Hmm.
That's how.
Right. That's really interesting. So for this next segment, I just want to get into some rapid fire questions, just
Sure.
whatever's on my mind that I think would be useful for the viewers. And the first one I get to is, do you think it's more beneficial to take handwritten notes or digital notes, or is it just a personal preference?
It's a personal preference.
Right.
It is absolutely a personal preference because at the end of the day, we are in a digital age
Hmm.
and everything will become computer based if it isn't already, right?
Hmm.
That's why there's a nice blend of like iPads and screens where you can use a stylus
Right.
to write on a screen, right?
Hmm.
At the end of the day, what matters most is simply intaking knowledge in a way that sticks for you specifically. Now,
Right.
taking a picture of notes and calling that studying doesn't work.
Right.
Reading through PowerPoint slides and calling that studying doesn't work. There has to be an active interaction with it, but it doesn't matter if that's handwritten or typed.
Awesome. The next one, I just wanted to get your opinion on what do you think is the best way to get in the zone? Like you mentioned earlier, how
Mhm.
you in busier places, it was easy for you to get in the zone and get into deep study. So how do you think people should try to get in the zone the best way possible?
Some students really, really benefit from exercise prior to studying
Hmm.
because it gets your blood flow going, it gets your brain cells up and awake. It really kind of gets you in the headspace for deep work, right? Because
Right.
you've gotten a lot of that body wiggle anxiety out, right? Another thing that a lot of students do, or that I used to do, is keep a motivation for myself. I understand that if I get in the zone now, I get to have fun later tonight.
Hmm.
Or if I study all weekend, then Sunday I get to go out with my friends,
Right.
right? Keeping a motivation factor is really, really important, but also just a mental preparation is so underrated. For
Hmm.
example, when you're going into an exam and you know you have a quiz versus when you have a pop quiz,
Right.
right? There's a lot of difference there. When you know you have a quiz, you've taken the time to prepare for it, you come in confident. You're in the right headspace to prepare.
Right.
But when you have a pop quiz and you haven't looked at any of the material, now you're in for a tough time.
Right. So the last question I want to get at is you mentioned the how we're in a very digital age, like we have more resources than ever before. One of those is AI, and I feel like schools discourage AI a lot, just like using it in general. So, do you recommend utilizing AI to help you study? And if so, how do you recommend doing that? And do you have any experience with it?
AI, like any other tool, is simply a resource, right?
Hmm.
My generation had Google, not to the extent that you guys had,
Right.
but we used it. We looked things up. We had to, right? With AI, the issue is when students use AI as a replacement for thinking,
Right.
as opposed to a tool used to gather
So they don't know
information.
how to like prompt it or use it properly. Right.
Precisely. If you are asking AI to write an essay for you, who is losing in that situation?
You are because you're not actually writing it.
You're not actually writing it, right? And you can argue, oh, if we have AI in this, we don't have to write anything ever again, right? But what you're losing is critical thinking and comprehension skills. What you're losing is the ability to form a coherent thought and to express yourself.
Right.
As we move forward into a further digital age, AI will not replace critical thinking.
Hmm.
AI is a tool we'll use to help further our critical thinking,
Right.
right? So the best way to use AI for school study is put in your information, learn about the things you don't know, and then use it to build something. Use it to help edit an essay. Use it to learn things that you've never learned before. Use it to understand a mathematical process. But if you're prompting AI to solve things for you, to write things for you, to create things for you, you're doing yourself a disservice because you're not really learning.
Right.
And two, when you're actually thrust into the working world and into real life, you'll realize you have no skills.
Right.
Okay? You can get the degree, you can pass college, you can get through high school, you can do all of those things. But if you have no skills, no one will hire you. And they will vet you based on your personality and personal skills,
Right.
right? You can have all the AI technology in the world, but if you can't hold a conversation because you never learned comprehension,
Exactly.
you're out of luck.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're running out of time for today's episode, so I just want to like we may have touched on it on the episode, but I want to get your opinion on the single most important study tip or trick to maximize study efficiency.
Single most important study trick is going to be deep study.
Right.
Okay. The same thing that I mentioned with Pomodoro technique and all that. Lock in. That's the best way I can describe it, especially for your generation. Lock in for a short amount of time and really understand in depth. The problem today is we all see things on a superficial level
Hmm.
without context. We want to take away context because we think it's more efficient. There's a reason context exists. Okay? You don't understand things on a deeper level without context. So
Right.
lock in and don't lose the context.
Right. I'm definitely going to try that out as I start college in a
You've got
semester in
this.
three
Oh,
days.
you've got
So
this. I've trained you, so I know you've
you
got
trained me
this.
well. All right, guys. Well, that's a wrap on today's episode of Dear Gen Z. I hope you picked up some practical tips you can use to make your studying more efficient and less stressful. Big thanks to Anika for joining me and sharing all of her helpful insights. If you're interested in possibly working with her, I'll leave her referral link in the description of Spotify and YouTube versions of the episode. I highly recommend checking it out. As always, if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to follow, share it with a friend, and leave a review. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.